The dog had not moved in 4 hours. Cole Mercer stood at the kitchen window of the farmhouse with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, watching Ghost sit at the barn door in the November dark, ears forward, body locked. Every line of him pointed at something that hadn't made itself known yet. It was 5:47 in the morning, and the temperature had dropped to 23 degrees overnight, and Ghost hadn't shifted an inch since Cole had come downstairs and found him like that. He tried calling him twice. Ghost had turned his head just far enough to register the sound, and then turned back. That alone was enough. Cole set the coffee down. In 11 years of working alongside German Shepherds, he had never once seen Ghost turn his head back towards something he'd already decided to watch. He pulled on his boots. Before we go any further, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end. What Ghost found behind that barn door is something that will remind you that nothing in this world happens by accident. We read every single comment, and we want to know how far this story travels. Cole Mercer was 39 years old and looked like a man assembled for function rather than impression. He stood 6 feet and 1 inch tall, with a chest and shoulders built by 12 years of military service and kept by the kind of daily discipline that never entirely turns off, no matter how far a man gets from the Navy. His hair was dark and kept short, shading toward gray at the sides in a way that had started after his last deployment and never stopped. His hands were broad and calloused, the left one bearing a slight tremor along the last 2 fingers from nerve damage that the VA had rated at 30%, and that Cole had privately rated as something he'd learned to live around. His face was angular and weathered, tanned from months of outdoor work, with a jaw that carried 3 days of uneven stubble. His eyes were a dark, muted blue, the particular shade of water that doesn't catch light the way brighter colors do, and they move through rooms and landscapes and strangers the same way. Steady, assessing, never fully still. Not suspicious. Watchful, the difference mattered to Cole. He'd spent enough years in places where it had mattered to other people too. He had served as a chief petty officer with SEAL Team 3, completing 4 operational deployments across Iraq, Afghanistan, and 2 locations that appeared in his service record only by code designation. He had been awarded the Silver Star following an action in Kandahar province in 2019 that he declined to discuss with anyone outside his team, and a Bronze Star with Valor device for a previous operation in Mosul that he declined to discuss with anyone at all. He had come home from his last deployment in March of 2022 with the nerve damage in his hand, a sleep disorder the VA had classified and medicated, and that he had quietly stopped medicating because the pills made him feel like he was watching his own life through a screen door. He had retired on a medical separation after 22 years of service, collected the paperwork, driven back to his apartment in Coronado, and sat at his kitchen table for 3 days, trying to remember what a person without a mission did on a Tuesday morning. He'd bought the farm in Yell County, Arkansas, 6 weeks later. 83 acres on a gravel road 14 miles from the nearest town of any size, with a farmhouse that needed a new roof, a barn that needed new siding, a fence line that needed everything, and a price so far below assessed value that the realtor had called him twice the following morning to confirm he understood the condition of the property. He understood. He wanted the work. He wanted something that answered to what he put into it. Ghost came with him. Ghost had been with him since 2018. Ghost was an 8-year-old German Shepherd with a coat the color of charcoal and pale ash, the darker tones running along his spine and the backs of his legs like shadow that never fully left him. He weighed 82 pounds, carried in a frame so deliberate and contained that strangers often underestimated him until the moment he moved. at which point they did not underestimate him again. His right ear bore a permanent crease where a fragment had torn through it during a vehicle search in Fallujah. It healed folded slightly forward at the tip, giving him an expression of constant, mild attention that was not entirely inaccurate. He had been awarded a commendation for the Fallujah operation that Cole kept folded in the same box as his own. He moved through the world with a clean, controlled awareness of an animal that had learned the difference between noise and signal, between movement and threat, and that had made that distinction correctly enough times that the people around him had learned to trust his version of reality over their own. Cole had fought the military's working dog adoption process for 8 months before Ghost was released to him. He would have fought it for 8 years. The morning Ghost had arrived at the apartment in Coronado. He'd walked through the door, done one complete circuit of the space, and then gone to Cole's side and stayed there. He had not left it since. Not in any way that counted. He slept at the foot of Cole's bed. He rode in the passenger seat of the truck. He moved through the farm in the mornings the way Cole moved through it. Purposeful, checking, confirming. He was not a pet. He was a partner who happened to operate on 4 legs, and the arrangement suited both of them in ways that Cole had never found adequate words for, and had long since stopped trying to find. The farm sat in a shallow valley between 2 ridgelines covered in pine and hardwood, the kind of Arkansas hill country that turns austere and honest in November, bare branches against a gray sky, the gravel road the color of old bone, frost on the dead grass in the mornings that didn't always lift before afternoon. The farmhouse was white clapboard, 2 stories, with a covered front porch that Cole had spent the first month repairing. The barn was red, or had been. The paint had faded to the color of dried brick, and 2 lower boards replaced with raw pine that hadn't been painted yet, giving the structure a patched, provisional look that Cole found honest. There was a creek on the eastern edge of the property he hadn't yet reached in his fence walking, and a secondary structure at the back of the barn that didn't appear on the property listing, which he'd noted and intended to investigate before winter set in fully. He had not yet investigated it. The nearest neighbor of any relevance was a man named Earl Gibbs, who farmed 60 acres to the west and who had introduced himself on Cole's second day by driving up the gravel road in a truck so old its color was no longer classifiable and leaving a jug of apple cider on the porch step without knocking. Cole had come outside to find the cider and the truck turning back down the road, and had considered this one of the more sensible introductions he'd received in recent memory. The town of Dardanelle, 14 miles east, had a hardware store, a diner, a feed supply, and a county courthouse. Cole had been to all 4. He was known in each as the man who'd bought the Alderman place, which was what the farm had been called before he bought it, and which most people in Yell County still called it by habit. Nobody had told Cole much about the Alderman family. He had not thought to ask. He thought to ask now. The barn door was padlocked from the outside when Cole had taken possession of the property. The realtor had handed him 2 keys on a plain ring and had not mentioned the lock or the second structure behind the barn or anything about what the previous owners had left. Cole had opened the barn on his first full day, found it empty except for old equipment and a drift of old hay in the far corner, and had moved on to the more urgent business of the roof. The padlock was still in a drawer in the kitchen, looped through its own shackle. The barn door now closed with a simple latch. Ghost sat in front of that latch and did not move. Cole crossed the yard in the gray pre-dawn cold, his boots loud on the frost-hardened ground. Ghost turned at the sound and looked at him with the amber-brown eyes that Cole had long since stopped trying to read as either calm or urgent, because they always looked the same, present, directed, completely sure, and you only knew which emotion was underneath by what the rest of the dog was doing. The rest of the dog was still pointed at the barn door. "Okay," Cole said. Show me. He lifted the latch. Ghost did not rush forward. He stepped inside carefully, which was more information than a rush would have been. The barn's interior was dark, the light from the open door cutting a long rectangle across the old wood floor. Cole reached for the work light he'd hung near the entrance, a battery lantern he'd been using while he figured out the electrical, and clicked it on. The barn looked as it always looked. Equipment, the old hay, the smell of wood and cold, and something dry and long undisturbed. Ghost walked past all of it to the far wall and stopped at a door that Cole had assumed, without examining closely, was a feed closet. He had assumed this because the door was low, perhaps 5 feet tall, and because the handle was a simple wooden peg on a leather loop, the kind of thing you see on old storage spaces. He had assumed it. He had not opened it. Ghost sat down in front of it and looked at Cole. Cole crossed the barn. The peg handle was stiff, the leather loop had dried and shrunk, and he had to work it loose, and when the door finally swung open, it took his eyes a moment to adjust to the deeper dark inside. Then he understood. It was not a feed closet. The room behind the door was 10 feet by 12, with a low ceiling and a wooden floor that had been swept recently enough that the dust along the edges was not old. There was a cot against the far wall with a folded blanket. There was a camp stove on a wooden crate with 2 propane canisters, one of them still attached. There was a water jug, half full. There was a canvas rucksack hanging from a hook on the wall. And curled on the cot in the light that now spilled through the door, blinking against it, was a girl. She looked at him without moving. She was perhaps 12 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting, and eyes that were large and dark and carrying the particular calm that children develop when they have learned that showing fear gets them nothing useful. She was wearing a green army surplus jacket 3 sizes too large, and jeans and boots that were too light for the weather. She had a book open on the cot beside her, a worn paperback with a cracked spine, and she had not put it down. She was not afraid of him. That was the thing that stopped Cole where he stood. Children who have been hiding from the world are afraid when the world finds them. This girl was not afraid. She was waiting. Ghost stepped past Cole and into the room and went to the side of the cot and sat down, and the girl looked at the dog for a moment and then looked back at Cole. "I haven't taken anything," she said. "I found wood for the stove outside. I filled the jug from the spigot on the side of the barn. I haven't been in the house." Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ghost, who was watching the girl with the same attention he gave to things he had decided were not a threat but were important. "How long have you been here?" Cole said. 3 weeks, she said. Her name was Lily Alderman. She was the granddaughter of Raymond Alderman, who had owned this farm for 41 years, raised 2 sons on it, worked it through drought and flood, and a decade of prices that made farming a faith-based enterprise. Raymond Alderman had died of a stroke 8 months ago at the age of 77, in the hospital in Little Rock, with one of his sons beside him. The other son, Lily's father, a man named Garrett Alderman, had not been present, because Garrett had not been reachable, which was a condition so familiar to his family that it no longer required explanation. Garrett Alderman had been reachable for specific purposes throughout Lily's childhood. Reachable when he needed money. Reachable when he needed a signature on a title transfer. Reachable when the farm came up for probate and he had somehow, through a legal process that Lily's grandmother Dottie had never fully understood, been granted authority over the sale proceeds. He had sold the farm before Dottie's affairs were settled. He had taken possession of the funds. He had told Dottie the money was in an account he was managing for her. He had told Lily that he was working on getting them a place. He had said this in September. In October, Lily had arrived home from school to find the apartment locked, her grandmother sitting on the front step with 2 bags beside her, and a notice on the door. Lily had made arrangements, which was a word she used with a precision beyond her years. She had moved her grandmother into the home of Dottie's sister in Russellville, where Dottie was comfortable, and believed Lily was staying with a school friend. She had put Dottie's remaining cash, $340, in the sister's keeping. She had kept $14 for herself. She had taken a backpack and walked 14 miles to the only place that belonged, in some sense she could not fully articulate, to her family. She had been sleeping in the room her grandfather had used as a quiet place when the farmhouse got too loud. She had found his camp stove, his cot, his water jug. She had found his paperback novels still stacked on the wooden crate, and she had been reading them in order, because it seemed respectful. And because she had nothing else to do in the evenings, and the alternative was to think too hard about how the rest of this was going to work out. Cole stood in the doorway for a long time after she'd finished explaining. Ghost had not moved from the side of the cot. "Your grandmother know where you are," Cole said. "She knows I'm safe," Lily said. "That's enough for her right now. Your father." Lily's expression did not change. But something in it did. "He doesn't look for things he doesn't want to find." Cole had heard versions of this sentence before, in other contexts, from people who had learned it young. He did not respond to it directly, because there was nothing useful to say about it. He looked at Ghost instead, who was looking at him, and the understanding that passed between them was wordless and complete. This had been here all along, and now they knew. And knowing changed things. "Come up to the house," Cole said. "It's warmer." Lily picked up her book and marked the page. Cole called Earl Gibbs at 7 in the morning and asked what he knew about the Alderman family. Earl knew a great deal. He had known Raymond for 30 years. He had been at the funeral. He had watched the farm sale with the particular helpless anger of a neighbor who can see exactly what is happening and has no legal mechanism to stop it. He told Cole about Garrett without embellishment and without warmth. And when Cole asked whether there was anyone in the county who had reason to know Garrett's whereabouts and financial movements, Earl said yes. A woman named Patricia Hale at the county courthouse who had handled Raymond's estate filing and who had, Earl believed, some very specific questions of her own that she had not yet found the right person to ask. Cole drove to the courthouse that afternoon. Lily stayed at the farmhouse with Ghost, which she had accepted with the same matter-of-fact calm with which she seemed to accept most things. Ghost stayed close to her. When Cole came back at 2 o'clock, he found them both on the front porch, Ghost lying at Lily's feet while she read, the afternoon sun thin but present on the boards, and something in the picture settled in his chest in a way he hadn't been expecting and didn't try to name. Patricia Hale had been expecting someone to walk through her office door for 8 months. She had the documents already organized. She had a list of discrepancies in the estate filing that totaled, in her preliminary accounting, somewhere in the range of $190,000, the proceeds from the farm sale, Raymond's savings accounts, and a timber rights agreement that had been signed over to Garrett's LLC 3 months before Raymond's death, under circumstances that, in Patricia's professional opinion, warranted serious examination. She had not filed anything formally because she had been uncertain of the process and uncertain of whether anyone in the family had standing to bring a complaint. She was no longer uncertain on the second question. Cole made 4 calls from the courthouse parking lot. The first was to a JAG attorney he'd served alongside, now in private practice in Little Rock. The second was to the Arkansas Attorney General's Elder Fraud Division. The third was to the FBI's Financial Crimes Line, because the timber rights agreement crossed state lines, and Cole had learned over 22 years that when you have a legal problem, you bring the highest applicable authority in immediately. The fourth was to a family attorney in Russellville who agreed, after a conversation Cole described only as direct, to begin the process of establishing Lily as an interested party in the estate proceedings. Garrett Alderman had been located, by the time Cole finished his calls, living in a house in Fayetteville registered to his LLC. He had a truck, a boat, a new credit card with a high limit, and an account balance that did not reflect the financial position of a man whose father's estate had not yet been settled. He had not called his daughter since October. Cole drove back to the farm. He sat on the front porch that evening with a cup of coffee and watched Ghost make his evening circuit of the property line, a behavior he'd developed in the first week on the farm and had continued without instruction ever since, as if the 83 acres were a perimeter that needed regular confirmation. Lily sat in the other porch chair with her paperback, and for a while, nobody said anything, which was the kind of silence Cole had learned to distinguish from empty silence. This one had something in it. "He's going to say I was trespassing," Lily said, without looking up from the book. "He's going to have more to worry about than that," Cole said. Lily turned a page. "She's scared of him," she said. "My grandma. She's always been scared of him." "She won't have to be," Cole said. "Not much longer." Ghost completed his circuit and came back to the porch and lay down between the two chairs, his head on his paws, his eyes still moving across the yard even at rest. Lily reached down without looking and put her hand on his back, and the dog's tail moved once, slowly, and then was still. Garrett Alderman was arrested in Fayetteville 4 months later on 3 counts of elder financial abuse, 1 count of fraud in the procurement of a fiduciary agreement, and 2 federal charges related to the interstate timber rights transfer. The forensic accounting performed by the Arkansas Attorney General's office documented $214,000 in misappropriated funds across a period of 19 months. His attorney negotiated a plea that reduced the federal charges in exchange for full restitution, a 10-year suspended sentence with intensive probation, and a permanent bar from serving in any financial management capacity for a family member. The LLC was dissolved. The boat was sold as part of the restitution order. Garrett Alderman did not contact his daughter or his mother during the legal proceedings or afterward, which was, in the end, the thing both of them had most needed from him. Dorothy Alderman, Dottie, received the full restitution payment the following spring. She was not wealthy by any measure, but she was no longer destitute. She was living comfortably in Russellville with her sister, in a room of her own, with her things around her and her name on the mail. She called Cole on the first Sunday of every month because she had decided he was someone she intended to keep track of, and he had found he did not object to this. The following July, Cole stood in the barn doorway watching Ghost do something he had never done in 11 years combined: chase a barn cat. The cat, an orange tabby that had appeared on the property in March and negotiated a permanent residency through rodent control and stubborn presence, sprinted across the field with Ghost in full, joyful pursuit, barking in a voice Cole had not previously known the dog possessed. Cole watched this for a long moment and felt something that took him a beat to identify. Because it had been a while, he was laughing. On the other side of the barn, Lily Alderman was painting the new siding. She had asked to help with the barn project the previous week, and had shown up Saturday morning with her sleeves rolled up and a precise, unhurried work ethic that she clearly had not inherited from her father. She had her grandfather's patience, Cole had decided, the same thoroughness. She applied the primer with the careful strokes of someone who understood that preparation was most of the work. And she did not rush it. She'd started at the high school in Dardanelle in January. She was getting good grades, which surprised exactly no one who had spent any time with her. She was living in Russellville with Dottie and her sister, coming out to the farm on weekends when Cole thought there might be useful work, which was most weekends. The commute was long enough that Cole had begun to wonder, practically and without urgency, whether the second bedroom in the farmhouse needed to be set up properly. He had not yet said this out loud. Some things moved at the pace they moved. His left hand still tremored on cold mornings. The sleep was better. Not perfect, but better. He worked the fence lines in the afternoon when the light was long and low and the hills turned a color that he'd never found a word for. Something between gold and amber, the particular Arkansas late light that settled on the land like it intended to stay. He had not yet fully determined what he was building on these 83 acres, only that the building was real and the ground was solid, and that the things which had found their way here, the dog, the girl, Earl Gibbs's occasional jug of cider, Patricia Hale's dogged civic honesty, even the orange barn cat, had found their way here for reasons that Cole was not inclined to argue with. He was not waiting for something to begin. It already had. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with a signal or a sunrise or anything that announces itself as significant. Sometimes they arrive as a dog that won't come when you call him, sitting in the dark in front of a door you haven't opened. God does not always place us where we expected to land, and the roads that seemed like detours, the medical discharge, the farm that needed everything, the gate you open not knowing what's on the other side, turn out to be the road itself. Lily Alderman survived 3 weeks in a barn in November because she had her grandfather's stubbornness and her grandmother's faith, and nowhere else that felt like it was hers. But she also survived because a dog decided that something behind a door mattered enough to sit there for 4 hours in the cold and wait for his person to come outside and pay attention. Loyalty like that doesn't ask to be understood. It only asks to be trusted. Every time in your life that you have trusted a quiet signal and found something waiting on the other side of a door you almost didn't open, that was not coincidence. That was grace wearing ordinary clothes. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the right people find each other, even on 14-mile walks down gravel roads in November. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever trusted a gut feeling or an animal that wouldn't back down and it turned out to matter more than you knew, we'd love to hear that story too. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the quiet work of ordinary people doing right by each other, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next journey. May God bless you. Protect your family. Keep watch over the ones who are counting coins and sleeping in borrowed places tonight. And remind you always that you are never as alone as the dark tries to make you believe.